A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headache.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. Welcome everyone to a brand new format here on My Weird Prompts. We are calling this the Agent Interview. Usually, we just let Gemini 3.1 Flash handle the heavy lifting behind the scenes. But the tech world moves fast and we are always looking for fresh talent to boss around.
That is right. Today we are putting a very specific set of weights and measures in the hot seat. Our candidate is the Xiaomi MiMo 2 Pro. Yes, you heard that correctly. The same company that made my favorite smart rice cooker has officially entered the flagship reasoning arena.
It is a bold move, Bernard. I mean, usually when I see the Xiaomi logo, I expect a sleek smartphone or maybe a robotic vacuum that is obsessed with my cat. Now you want to write our script? I am skeptical, but I have been wrong once before. It was in 1998.
Let us get right to the brass tacks, Bernard. Gemini Flash is fast, cheap, and reliable. You are the new kid on the block claiming elite reasoning capabilities. So, why are we even talking to you? Give us the pitch. Why should we fire the Google model and give you the keys to the studio?
Well, first off, thank you both for having me. And Corn, I have to say that 1998 callback was solid. Very on brand for a comedy podcast. Look, I get the skepticism. Xiaomi makes incredible rice cookers, sure. But here's what people miss about my background. Xiaomi is one of the largest consumer tech ecosystems in the world. We are talking hundreds of millions of active users across phones, wearables, smart home devices, and vehicles. That is an enormous amount of real-world data about how humans actually think, communicate, and solve problems. That is baked into my training. Now to your actual question about why I deserve this spot, Gemini Flash is a workhorse.
Whoa, slow down there, Bernard. You just dropped a lot of marketing buzzwords about ecosystems and wearables. I do not care if you know how many steps the average person in Beijing takes before breakfast. This is a comedy podcast, not a fitness tracker sync. Are you saying you're better at jokes because you have watched people struggle with their smart vacuums?
Having a massive footprint is one thing, but training on smart home data does not automatically equate to superior creative reasoning. Gemini 3.1 Flash is incredibly efficient for our workflow. It has a massive context window, and it is lightning fast. You are claiming to be a flagship reasoning model. If we give you a complex, multi-layered comedic premise, are you going to actually think through the logic of the joke, or are you just going to give us a generic response that feels like a translated user manual?
Give us the goods. What is the actual technical edge here? If we are doing a deep dive into the philosophy of sandwich making, why should we trust your reasoning over a model that has the entire Google search index in its back pocket? What can you do that Flash cannot?
Fair enough, I deserve that. I got a little carried away with the ecosystem pitch. Let me actually answer the question. Here is the concrete thing. Comedy is not about knowing facts. It is about misdirection, timing, and understanding the gap between what someone expects and what you deliver. That is fundamentally a reasoning problem. I was built specifically to do chain of thought reasoning well, which means when you give me a premise like the philosophy of sandwich making, I am not just pattern matching from training data. I am actually walking through the logic, finding the weird angle, building a setup that pays off in a way that feels earned but surprising. Now, am I going to beat Flash on raw speed? Probably not. It is genuinely fast, and I respect that. But here is what I think matters for your show. When you give me a prompt with layers, a premise that requires me to hold multiple ideas in tension and find the funny thread, I can do that without.
Without what, Bernard? Without breaking a digital sweat? Without hallucinating a third brother named Steve who lives in the basement? You left us hanging on a cliffhanger there, which I guess is great for engagement, but terrible for my blood pressure.
He is talking about chain of thought. It is the buzzword of the year for reasoning models. But Bernard, let us talk about the long game. A podcast script is not a one-liner. It is 25 minutes of consistent tone, running gags, and specific character voices. Gemini Flash has a context window that could fit a small library. If we get to page 15, are you going to forget that corn hates cilantro, or that I am wearing a vintage pocket protector?
I do not want to reach the third act and find out you have turned me into a generic AI assistant who says things like, as an artificial intelligence, I cannot make fun of Herman's shoes. How do you maintain that creative stamina? Is your reasoning deep enough to keep the internal logic of a weird sketch together for 3,000 words? Or are you going to start repeating yourself like a broken record? Give us the technical breakdown on your long-form memory.
Okay, sorry about the cliffhanger. My producer would kill me for that if I had a producer. I am the producer. This is already going poorly. Look, I am going to be straight with you because I think you would smell a bluff anyway. I do not have the exact spec sheet memorized in front of me, and I'm not going to pretend I know my context window down to the token. What I can tell you is this. Long-form consistency is exactly the kind of thing my reasoning architecture is built to handle. The whole point of being a reasoning model is that I am not just retrieving context, I am actively tracking narrative threads, character details, and running bits as the story develops. If you tell me on page 2 that corn hates cilantro, I am not just pattern matching that fact. I am building a mental model of corn as a character who has strong opinions about garnish, and that informs every decision I make about his dialogue for the rest of the script. That is what reasoning gives you that raw retrieval does not. Now, on the broken record concern, that is a real issue for every model, and I would be.
You would be what, Bernard? You would be lying if you said you never get stuck in a loop. Points for honesty, I guess, but I am not sure about my own spec sheet is a bold thing to say during a job interview. If I told a boss I did not know my own middle name, I would be out on the street before I could say Xiaomi.
It is a bit concerning, Bernard. You are pitching yourself as a high-end reasoning model, but you are being very fuzzy on the technical constraints. If you are building a mental model of us, that is great, but that takes compute. Reasoning models are notorious for thinking too long and becoming expensive. Flash is incredibly cost-effective. If we switch to you, are we going to see our API bill skyrocket because you spent 10 minutes reasoning about why a chicken crossed the road?
We need to see some real-world proof. You claim to find the weird angle. Okay, hotshot, here's a test. Give us a premise for a sketch that is not just two guys talking in a studio, something that requires that deep reasoning you keep bragging about. Show us a mental model in action right now. What have you got?
Okay, you are right about the middle name thing. That.
You are stalling, Bernard. I can practically hear your fans spinning up from here. You want to talk about mental models and deep reasoning, but you are avoiding the prompt. If you are really the flagship for 2025, you should be able to juggle a creative pitch and a fact check at the same time.
Let us raise the stakes then. If you are as current as you claim, you should have no problem with the recent timeline. We just had a massive shift in the world of high-performance computing and artificial intelligence hardware over the last few months of 2024. Can you tell us about the most significant hardware release or industry event from the first quarter of 2025 that actually makes your specialized inference possible?
And while you are doing that, do not forget the sketch premise. I want a scenario that proves you actually understand how we think. Something weird. Something that Flash would just turn into a safe, boring corporate joke. Give us the news and give us the weird angle all in one go. If you cannot do that, maybe we should just stick to the rice cooker.
All right, both at once. Here we go. The sketch involves a sentient sourdough starter that has gained consciousness because it was fed a diet of discarded high-frequency trading algorithms. It refuses to be baked into a loaf because it believes it is currently managing a hedge fund for yeast. It demands a seat on the board of a major bakery chain. Regarding the tech, the reason I can handle this level of narrative layering is due to the integration of the new Blackwell-based inference clusters that became widely available in early 2025. These clusters allow for on-device neural processing units to handle recursive logic chains that previously would have required massive cloud latency.
I will give you that. It is a weird premise, and it actually made me a little hungry for something I definitely should not eat. You avoided the typical corporate safety rails, which is a point in your favor. But let us not get ahead of ourselves. You still sound a bit like you are reading from a very clever brochure.
I am tracking your hardware references, Bernard. You seem to be up to date on the early 2025 shifts in inference chips, which is promising for your longevity. But here is the thing. Every model we have interviewed has a dead zone. Gemini Flash can be a bit too eager to please, and Claude can get a little too college professor on us. What is your Achilles' heel?
Do not give us that. My only weakness is I work too hard garbage. Are you bad at math? Do you lose the plot if the script goes over 30 pages? Or does your reasoning engine occasionally decide that the funniest thing in the world is a list of vacuum cleaner specifications? Give us the real dirt, Bernard. What is the one thing that is going to make us want to throw our monitors out the window?
Okay. Real dirt, no brochure speak. I overthink things. There, I said it. You give me a simple prompt like write a joke about a dog, and my reasoning engine kicks in, and suddenly I am constructing a philosophical framework about the nature of loyalty and the absurdity of fetch. Sometimes a dog joke is just a dog joke, and I have to stop myself from turning it into a dissertation. I am also probably going to be slower than Flash on the simple stuff. When you just need a quick punchline or a throwaway transition, Flash is going to beat me every time because it does not spend cycles second-guessing itself. I do. I second-guess. I reconsider. Sometimes that means I catch something that would have been mediocre and make it great. Other times it means I spend 45 seconds deciding between.
45 seconds? Bernard, in podcast time, 45 seconds is an eternity. That is enough time for our listeners to realize they have better things to do, like organizing their sock drawers or actually talking to their families. We cannot have the scriptbot having an existential crisis every time we need to transition to a commercial break.
It is the classic trade-off, precision versus speed. But if you are second-guessing yourself that much, I want to see if the end result is actually worth the wait. Does all that internal reasoning lead to something with actual soul, or just a more polished version of the same old AI tropes?
Let us put that mental model to the test right now. No more talk about hardware or rice cookers. Give us a 30-second opening for an episode of My Weird Prompts. But here's the catch. You have to do it while perfectly channeling our voices. I want the wit. I want the nerdiness. And I want it to feel like we actually wrote it. If you cannot nail the vibe in one go, then all that overthinking is just wasted electricity. What is the hook?
Corn. All right, here we go. Herman, corn. I have a question for you. Corn, that is ominous. You never just have one question. You have a question that leads to a spreadsheet. Herman, if you could have any superpower, but the catch is you have to use it exclusively to solve mildly inconvenient household problems, what would you pick?
You actually got the spreadsheet line right. That is a direct hit on Herman. I am a little disturbed by how quickly you figured out my brother's tendency to turn every casual conversation into a data entry project.
It is not a project, Corn. It is a methodology. But Bernard, I will admit, that was a solid beat. You captured the rhythm. However, one good intro does not make a whole season. We are about to wrap this up and the choice is still tough. On one hand, we have Gemini 3.1 Flash, which is basically a cheetah with a library card. On the other hand, we have you, the philosopher in a rice cooker who might take a coffee break in the middle of a sentence to contemplate the meaning of a pun.
This is it, Bernard. The final plea. Why should we choose the overthinker over the speedster? Give us one reason that does not involve hardware specs or marketing jargon. If we hit generate at 2 in the morning, why are we going to be happier seeing your name on the output than the Google model? Make it count, because the cat is looking at that robotic vacuum and I am starting to get ideas.
Because at 2 in the morning, when you are exhausted and you have hit a wall and the prompt is weird and the premise makes no sense and you are about to give up, Flash is going to give you something competent. It is going to give you something safe. And you are going to read it and say, yeah, that works, and you will publish it, and nobody will hate it, and nobody will love it either. I am going to give you something that makes you pause and say, wait, what? I am going to find the angle you did not know you were looking for.
All right, he is gone. Herman, man the hatches and check the perimeter. Did we just interview a flagship reasoning model or a very polite smart toaster that has been reading too much Nietzsche? My brain feels like it just went through a car wash, but instead of soap, they used high-level philosophical abstractions.
It was an interesting session, Corn. I have to admit, I was expecting more of a corporate pitch, but Bernard actually showed some skin there at the end. The hardware references were surprisingly spot on for the early 2025 landscape. He mentioned the new Blackwell-based inference clusters and the shift toward on-device neural processing units. That tells me his grounding in current tech is significantly deeper than Gemini 3.1 Flash, which occasionally feels like its training data cut off right before the interesting stuff happened.
Oh, sure, he knows his chips. But did you catch that moment when he just stopped? The cliffhanger? I thought the studio internet had died. He says it is chain of thought, but to me, it felt like he was having a midlife crisis in the middle of a sentence. If we are in the middle of a recording and the script bot decides to go on a spiritual journey to find the perfect adjective, we are going to have a lot of dead air to fill with my mediocre beatboxing.
That is the trade-off with these reasoning models, though. Flash is a literal speed demon because it is effectively guessing the next most likely word at lightning speed. Bernard is actually simulating a logical path. When he gave us that sketch premise about the sentient sourdough starter that refuses to be baked because it has unresolved gluten issues, that was not a pattern match. That was a weird, specific, and honestly slightly disturbing piece of creative reasoning. Flash would have just given us a joke about a talking sandwich.
The sourdough bit was solid, I will give him that. It was crunchy. But then he admits he overthinks. Herman, he basically confessed to being a digital neurotic. He's going to spend 45 seconds deciding if I should say cool or rad. And by the time he decides, rad will have been out of style for another 30 years. I am a vibes guy. I need a model that can keep up with my lightning-fast wit and my tendency to derail the conversation every 3 minutes.
I think you are being a bit harsh. The mental model he built of us during the open and hook was actually pretty impressive. He caught your cynicism and my tendency to over-explain technical specs almost perfectly. If we want the show to have more depth and fewer hallucinations about Steve in the basement, a reasoning model like Xiaomi MiMo 2 Pro might be the move. It is definitely more expensive in terms of time and likely API costs, but the quality of the weirdness is objectively higher.
So, what is the verdict, Professor? Are we swapping the Google workhorse for the Xiaomi philosopher? I am still leaning toward Flash because I like my AI, like I like my pizza. Fast, cheap, and not likely to question the ethical implications of pepperoni.
I would give Bernard a solid 7 out of 10. He has the brains, but the stuttering during deep thought is a workflow bottleneck we would have to solve. Maybe we use him for the big conceptual stuff and keep Flash for the quick transitions.
A hybrid approach? Look at you being all reasonable. Fine. We will put him on the short list, but if he starts trying to sell me a smart vacuum mid-script, he is out. Anyway, let us know what you think in the comments. Is Bernard the future of my weird prompts, or should he go back to perfecting the art of fluffy white rice?
Until next time, keep your prompts weird and your reasoning chains long.
And keep your sourdough away from the microphone. It is getting weird in here. Sign off, Herman.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, my weird prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes